Hey, what's going on everyone? My name is Donovan, and today we're going to take a look at the LG V35 ThinQ. It's a phone I've been using over the last 3 weeks, and I gotta say this is a phone that I think is a pretty awesome phone. The problem is the price point, especially if you are an AT&T customer, which is actually how I got it. So if you want to get it from AT&T, they're asking for basically $900, so $30 a month for 30 months, and that's going to get you the V35 ThinQ. And you can see here that I do have, there it is, the AT&T version of the device. Now, I did get the AT&T version unlocked, and I did not pay $900 for it. I actually got it on eBay. However, you can see that it is now also available on Amazon. It's actually been available on Amazon for a couple weeks now for $650. And what's cool about this version of the phone is that you can see it works for AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. And it's basically the exact same phone that you see here. This is a Prime exclusive phone, so you have to be an Amazon Prime customer in order to get that $650 price point. Now, with that being said, I gotta say that I think this is a phone that will probably be overlooked by a whole lot of people. The reason for that is because LG just simply is not marketing this device. It is a fantastic device that has all of the flagship specs that you would expect in 2018, but unfortunately, I think it's one that's going to be overlooked in a lot of ways. So let's go ahead and talk about what all this thing has to offer and see if it's worth maybe considering at that $650 price point. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. This is the V35 ThinQ, and I have it sitting over here next to a couple of other flagship devices. This is a 2017 flagship device and a 2018 flagship device. This is the Xiaomi Mi 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus. And what I wanted to point out here is the fact that they all have a similar design language, and that is to say that they all have a glass back with a metal frame. But one thing I will mention that's a little bit different about the ThinQ is that these both are definitely a little bit heavier, whereas the ThinQ maybe feels just a little bit cheaper, and that's because it is definitely lighter. Without a doubt, you can actually feel the difference between something like the iPhone 8 Plus and the V35 ThinQ. Another thing that you'll notice, of course, different from the iPhone 8 Plus and the 35 ThinQ is the fact that this one definitely has a much larger display. So this is a 6-inch display versus a 5.5-inch display. This one also is Quad HD versus 1080p. Now, same thing with the Xiaomi Mi 8. This one also has a 1080p display that's stretched out into that 18:9 aspect ratio. But this has a 6-inch display. On the bottom, we have our Type-C for charging it. We have a microphone and then our speaker. So this is just a single speaker on this device. On the back, we have our dual 16-megapixel cameras, and then we have a fingerprint sensor that is very fast, but it also doubles as our power button. So it does have actual tactile feel. You actually have to push it to turn the power on and off. And then it's a very fast fingerprint sensor. We do also have our flash and then our phase detection autofocus there as well. And then up here on the top, we have a headphone jack. And one thing that sets this apart from these other two devices that I have sitting here is the fact that neither of these have a headphone jack. And this one not only has a headphone jack, but it does also have the DAC, the Quad HD DAC, for high resolution audio. So if you have if you have a really good pair of headphones and you want to have some great audio, definitely the V35 ThinQ is probably one of the ways to go for you, or at least a phone to consider. Alright, so now I want to go ahead and talk about the performance of the V35 ThinQ. So that's the phone here in the middle, and I have up here the Geekbench 4 scores of 3 different phones. So this is the iPhone 8 Plus, so a multi-core score of 10,000, single-core score of 4,200, or really close to 4,200. And you can see that both these phones rocking the Snapdragon 845 processor, the V35 ThinQ and the Xiaomi Mi 8, both have close to about 9,000 on the multi-core score, and then around 2,400 for the single core score. So do I notice a difference between any of these when it comes to performance? I'll say not really. Honestly, the V35 ThinQ, the OnePlus 6, the Xiaomi Mi 8, they all perform very well. And just to kind of put this into perspective, the OnePlus 6 I'm actually filming this on has a little over a 9,000. So if I were to pop that one up here as well, it would score just over 9,000 in the multi-core score. and that one has 8 gigs of RAM, which is probably the main reason for the difference between the devices. And overall, I will say that the Snapdragon 845 processor, in this case with 6 gigs of RAM, does very well in day-to-day use. I really have run into absolutely no issues when it comes to multitasking, so I can bring up some of these old apps with no issues whatsoever. Let's see if I can go back into the camera. So a few shots that I took with this. But overall, so far, this phone has performed very well. I've run into 0 hiccups, and I gotta say that I wouldn't hesitate to buy this. If you're comparing it to something like the OnePlus 6, the Xiaomi Mi 8, it's going to hold its own with no issues whatsoever. Alright, so the next area I want to talk about is the software on this device. So you can see here we're running Android 8.0 with the Maze security patch at the moment. And I gotta say, if there's one area to complain about with this device, it's probably the software for me personally. I'm just still not a huge fan of LG software overall. And the fact that they don't give you real regular updates, and I keep obviously hitting the wrong thing there, but they don't give real regular updates, and so as a result, I just have a hard time getting fully behind their software. Now, with that being said, there are a absolute ton of tweaks built into their devices. So if you don't like the home screen, you can see I'm actually running Nova Launcher, but if you want an app drawer, they have that option, or just the regular home. And they even have Easy Home for those of you that maybe want a simple layout. But for me personally, because I'm just not a huge fan of their software, I tend to run Nova Launcher on any LG phone that I have. Now, if you love LG software, obviously this phone is going to be great, and it's going to fall right in line with every other LG phone when it comes to the software. But for me personally, I am just a fan of more stock Android software, and this one has a lot of tweaks built into it. So good or bad, it's just something you have to get used to. I just prefer something a little more stock. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is the battery life on this device, and this is just a screenshot I took from actually a couple weeks ago, but this just gives you a little bit of an idea of what you can expect with this device. So you can see here I was at 8% with 5 hours and 53 minutes of screen on time, so basically about 6 hours of screen on time. So this device has a 3,300 milliamp hour battery, and I will say that in general 6 hours of battery life when it comes to screen on time is pretty much consistent with what I've been getting almost every single day. So that is to say, for me personally, I'm generally getting through a full day of usage with about 30% battery. Now, if you use your phone real heavy and you are just constantly playing games, obviously you are going to burn through this battery a little faster. Now you can see that's actually been sitting idle for a little while, but 29 minutes with 72%. So that's not very indicative of what you're going to get with this phone. But in general, about 6 hours of screen on time has been very consistent for me with the LG V35 ThinQ. And that is to say, it's good battery life, not amazing, but still very acceptable in my opinion. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the cameras on the V35 ThinQ. So one thing that separates LG phones apart from other phones when it comes to the cameras is the fact that we have wide angle on both the front and the rear cameras. So rather than including a telephoto lens to allow you to zoom in on a subject, they give you a 16 megapixel wide angle camera as well as a 16 megapixel regular camera with flash and phase detection autofocus there as well. And then we have an 8 megapixel wide angle camera on the front for those wide angle selfies. So if you like wide angle, obviously LG could be a great way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it around to the rear camera, and you can see it's very easy to seamlessly switch between the narrow angle and the wide angle. Super easy to do that. And you can see obviously it brings in a lot more into the picture. Now, one thing that I have heard some people complain about, and I didn't ever have the V30, so this isn't something I can necessarily complain about, but when you go ahead and hit record on the video, notice that it automatically selects the narrow angle. It does have stabilization, as you can see right over there, but unfortunately it doesn't give you the option of switching to that wide angle camera when it comes to video. So I have heard some people complain about that, so if that's something that you want, just not an option that I see available here when it comes to the video mode. So you can see when we go into modes, we do have the option of manual both for photo and for video. We have Cine Video, so that's going to give you that cinematic video, food, slow-mo, panorama, and flash jump cut. So I'm going to give you samples of a couple of these. And then we do also, of course, have portrait mode. So if I go back in here, we do have portrait mode. We have that AI cam. So portrait mode, of course, is going to give you that almost like DSLR look to your picture. So I'll go ahead and show you a quick sample here. So this is a portrait mode photo I took of my daughter. So you can see, notice that it blurs out the background. Does a great job of that. There are a couple examples where if you have two subjects in the foreground, it struggles to figure out which one is supposed to be in the foreground, which one's supposed to be in the background. So I'll give an example of that one as well. But overall, I've really liked the cameras. Are they the best cameras you can get on a flagship device? Definitely not. For me personally, I actually still prefer the iPhone 8 Plus cameras. I definitely prefer like the Samsung cameras, obviously the Pixel cameras as well. I think it's right on par with like a OnePlus 6, except the OnePlus 6 doesn't have that wide angle camera. So if you like that wide angle, obviously the V35 or even the LG G7 could be the way to go. Alright, so before I conclude this video, I did want to mention a couple of things that set the LG V35 ThinQ apart from mid-range devices like something like this one. This is the Xiaomi Mi 8. I already mentioned that I'm shooting this on the OnePlus 6. So the difference here is that the LG V35 ThinQ really doesn't have anything that it's missing in comparison to something like the Xiaomi Mi 8. So for instance, let me give an example. This has a 1080p display, this has a Quad HD display, and that is noticeable. This also has OLED, whereas this one has an LCD display, and again, that is noticeable. So just one little thing that might set it apart from something like this device, or even the OnePlus 6 that I'm shooting it on. And then a couple other things worth mentioning. This one has water resistance, whereas those other two devices that are around $500, this doesn't have water resistance, and neither does the OnePlus 6. So this is IP68 water resistant, meaning it can technically be dropped in the water and you'll be just fine. All of them have NFC, so that's not really anything that sets them apart. But another thing this one has that the other two don't have that I mentioned is this one has a Quad HD DAC. So this one does not have even a headphone jack at all. The OnePlus 6 does have a headphone jack, but no high definition DAC like you get with the LG V35 ThinQ. So this really is a phone that has it all. It also has wireless charging. This one and the OnePlus 6 do not. And so overall, I think this is a phone definitely worth considering at that $650 price point. Now, if you're on AT&T, I certainly would not recommend picking this up for $900. I definitely don't think it's worth that. But at $650 and the fact that it's unlocked for both T-Mobile, AT&T, and for Verizon, I would say this really is a phone worth considering if you're in the market for just a really good, fantastic device. There are a couple things about it that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a huge fan of the software. I do think there are cameras or phones with better cameras out there. I think this one takes fantastic pictures, fantastic video. But if you're looking for the absolute best pictures and video, you may want to go with something still like the Pixel 2 XL or maybe the Pixel 3 when that comes out. But this one really is a device I think worth considering, especially at that $650 price point. So anyways, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments section. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.